Great. Hi, everyone. Thank you for trekking across to the Education Centre, and I imagine that half of you are here because you don't want to talk about Brexit. We're going to talk about something that's a little bit more exciting and a little bit more escapist. So we've got an hour, and I'm hoping that the last half hour of that we get to do something a little bit practical and a little bit moving around and get to go out into the zoo a little bit as well. So afternoon of day 2, treat you to something that will hopefully keep you awake. Welcome to, hopefully you're all here for putting wildlife on the map, which I now realise I've put the wrong word on this slide, which is a great start to a slideshow. But putting wildlife on the map, and we're going to be talking about biological recording and citizen science. So hopefully that's what you think you are here for, because that's what you're in for. So my name's Matt. You might have seen me running around the conference. I work for the Natural History Consortium. There's a lovely picture of my face, which is slightly obscene when I stand next to it. And you might be thinking, why is this conference organising person coming to talk to me about biological recording? And basically, so the Communicate Conference is not the only thing that we do as the Natural History Consortium. That is the Natural History Consortium, our 13 partners, which I won't go through all of them. Basically, we have 3 big programs that we work on through the year. So we have our very kind of public-facing program of the Festival of Nature, which is the UK's biggest celebration of the natural world. And if you are back in here in the session after this, you'll be hearing a little bit more about that. But you will have to put up with me again. We then have the Communicate Conference, which you're all at, so presumably know a little bit about. And then in the middle there we have BioBlitz, and so we coordinate a UK community of practice around this event format for engaging people with biological data and biological recording. And so I have a hand in all of these things as our very small team at the consortium. And then on a side note, I'm also a trustee of this thing, which is the National Biodiversity Network, which is the UK aggregator of biological data, and is also the UK's biggest partnership of environmental organisations, with over 200 organisations that filter data into it and take data out of it, and are all part of that big partnership. What else were we going to talk about? So, what is biological recording? Well, it starts off with an observation. Seeing a piece of wildlife, encountering a piece of wildlife. This is a photo I took the other day in central Bristol, just off Castle Park, on the corner of the Finzel's Reach development. This is all scaffolding. And this little grey blob in the corner, I can reliably assure you, is a male peregrine. That is the best photo I could get with my phone at 8 o'clock in the morning as I was walking past on my commute. And to take it from an observation to being a record of that wildlife, where it is and when, is that we need these extra bits of information. The who, there's my face again, in case you'd forgotten. The when, and this is usually a calendar date, so this was on the 7th of October that I took this picture, and the where, so putting that record on the map. And so for this one, it was the who, was me, the what was a peregrine, the where is Passage Street in Bristol. This is the 6-figure grid reference for 100 metres squared. And the when, so the date. So you've got your record. But actually that record, and quite a lot of people do this as a hobby. A lot of bird watchers do this. And chose a bird, A, because peregrine is, well, I saw one, so, go for it. But also there's groups like the BTO, and there's kind of these big groups of organisations where people go out and do this for a hobby. And you'd be surprised how many of them there are. The thing is that what you need to do to make that data useful is that it has to go somewhere. It has to go to somewhere where it can be combined with other data so that it then is something that a researcher or somebody can use to make some sense of. And here in the UK, they kind of have 2 major channels. And I should point out at this point that this is the most simplified diagram ever. If you saw the real diagram of how this actually works, you would all run away screaming. I often do. And so, broadly speaking, you can break things up into 2 categories of the local data sets, like the environmental record centres are kind of the regional organisations that look after the data for a particular region, are often linked to the local wildlife trust or local authority. or museum service. And then you also have groups that are looking at this in a national sense, so usually looking at particular taxonomic groups. So you might have the Arachnologists Society or the BTO for birds. And so they're looking sort of at a more national level. And they all look at these data sets sort of slightly differently and in slightly different ways and collect them in slightly different ways with different programs. And so you have groups like the NBN that I mentioned before, who act as the aggregators, bring that data together into one big metadata set that then is much more, then filters back and is much more useful. And I thoroughly recommend having an explore of something called the NBN Atlas, which is an online facility for exploring that data, which is extremely powerful as well. And then, of course, the next step is that it goes on to a user. And those users of this data count as things like the, many of you will have heard of the State of Nature report that came out in 2013 and 2016. A lot of this is the kind of data that feeds into those kind of reports that tells about how our local wildlife is doing. It also gets, in that aggregator level as well, you then get another level of aggregation where there's a group called GBIF, which is the Global Biodiversity Information Facility, thank you very much, which then aggregates across many countries across the world. And they've recently brought in a system where you can actually track the use of that data for scientific publications as well, and it all gets referenced back to these data sets. So me taking my picture of this falcon in the centre of Bristol last week will eventually filter its way through this system and could end up in someone's research paper or as a part of someone's conservation action plan for the species, or could filter back into Bristol City Council and look at their planning system for where peregrines are, etc. And of course, these users don't just get their data from the aggregator, it can come directly from some of the other organizations as well. That is the fastest that I think anyone has ever tried to explain biological recording, but I've given it a go. So hopefully, there's a little bit of nodding going on around the room, so I'm going to take that as a good sign and assume that everyone now is expert in the process of biological recording. We'll never have to ask another question about it ever again. This is a map of the distribution of peregrines for the data from last year. So my peregrine record will eventually appear on this map in the centre of Bristol. And so this has come from the NBN Atlas, and you can take a look and explore that, and you can break up the data in innumerable different ways. If you are a maps and data geek, it is hours of fun. And here, so I mentioned the State of Nature report, and the thing is that most of this data is not collected professionally. The vast majority of this data is collected by volunteers, and this was this is the number one call to action in the top of the State of Nature report, which is to call on people to count the nature that we are seeing declining across the UK, and also those ones which are increasing, and how that's kind of indicative of the changes going on in our landscape. And so part of what we've done, and I'd mentioned BioBlitz before, and so where I started working on this was when I joined the consortium back in 2011, the Bristol Natural History Consortium, as we then were, had run the first BioBlitz in the UK back in 2009, and had since, working with partners like the Natural History Museum in London and Marine Biological Association in Plymouth, we'd since kind of almost accidentally self-appointed ourselves as like the national experts on BioBlitz, because we'd done one once, and so we thought we knew a little bit about how to do it, and we'd learned a lot in the experience. And so we started putting together some of that learning into things like these, which are still available to download from our website. So things like the Guide to Running a BioBlitz 2.0, because we wrote one a bit earlier, that's the updated version. And crowdsourcing things from the sector as well, this kind of let's talk about it. So really bringing some of our communicate wisdom from this conference and taking it into practical application through the BioBlitz program, which was really exciting. And those are available on our website. And the idea of BioBlitz, so it's basically, the basic concept is that it's 24 hours to find as much wildlife as you can. And so it would be people, in the beginning of when we were doing this, it's very much people going out with clipboards and writing down those 4 things of who they were, what they'd seen, where they'd seen it, and when, and then we'd filter that into our local record center. There'd be an awful lot of data crunching going on, and eventually we'd come out with a number which was semi-accurate of how many different species we'd found that day. And so the idea being that we would take this kind of mash of our local expert naturalists, our scientists from the universities, and then bringing them together with school groups, with members of the public, with families, and putting together activities that would kind of blend this idea of collecting data whilst having fun out in nature. And so it's very much the idea of kind of introducing people on one level to their green spaces and their parks and the places where they can go into and take a look at them at a different light. Looking at things a little bit more closely as well. It's amazing how much more closely you look at the different species of weeds and things that are around when you're trying to get your numbers up on your account. Introducing people to the concept of recording wildlife. There's a lot of people that come to these kind of events who are not beginners in wildlife. They actually know an awful lot, but don't contribute that data to anything. You know, they might have. I've met people who had. I met a guy who had 30 years worth of bat records under his bed. Great thing to have. Functionally useless. Developing skills and knowledge. We have a big volunteer program attached to it, so lots of workshops and things, getting people learning about how to identify bumblebees, how to collect data, and of course the data itself that we collect on the day, which forms a kind of great snapshot of whatever space you are looking at. So that was BioBlitz. And there's that thing. And actually, whilst we're on there as well, and I'm going to introduce Shaun very briefly as well, but another thing that we had is some beautiful international work that came out of some of these things as well, but Shaun will, I'm sure, touch on. Put you on the spot there. And one of the great things I think that is really interesting about the BioBlitz concept is that it's a way of kind of casting the net a bit wider for wildlife. It's kind of giving people a reason. We've heard a lot today about kind of people needing the excuse, the reason to go into a green space and experience things. If you're in the Natural England mini session about audiences, it was kind of really interesting about kind of why do people go into green spaces. And this is an opportunity to kind of throw in, here's a why to come out and explore. And so this is one of my favorite photos. This was from when we did a BioBlitz activity at WOMAD Music Festival. And not the most diverse audience in terms of culturally. They're a very middle-class white festival, which is interesting because it's such an international plethora of things on show. But anyway, one of the interesting things I think about that is the diversity of expressions on people's faces. You've got the full range of human emotion displayed across there. And what's in this little bag here, these are mammal traps. So this is Longworth traps, if any of you have done some sort of practical ecology stuff for surveying small mammal populations. And so in here is a field mouse. This is one of our volunteers, expert naturalists. You've got guys who are really keen right up the front, who are really getting stuck in there. You've got the not quite so sure, who I think these guys might be related. Exactly the same expression. Here is actually someone running away. And you've sort of got everything from fascination to who am I going to hit with this stick? So it's kind of opening up those kind of touch points for people who maybe they haven't come here for wildlife. They've come here to listen to some music, get drunk at a field, and hope that. I think most of them came over to us in the hope that we would look after their children for a bit. But getting them sort of those touching points, I think a lot of people, we were probably one of the things that they were talking about afterwards, I like to think. But as well as this kind of breadth and saying how many people can we kind of reach and get into this thing, I think one of the things that we've really learned over the process of doing BioBlitz is that one of the strongest outputs of it is around the depth of engagement. And so this is a group called, of young people from a group called Bristol Nature Network, which actually evolved out of our volunteer group who's sitting around at a BioBlitz, having just like got all of our school groups to go, and we were all kind of just on a little bit of a come down after chasing 400 children around a site, which sounds weirder than it was meant to. And they basically came together and they said, well, we do BioBlitz every year. We come to the festival every year and do things like that. But like, there's some of this stuff that we could just do. We could just get together and do this. And so we set up a meeting, we bought some pizza, we put some money behind the bar in a pub, and we said, right, who wants to come and talk about maybe setting up some sort of group for, I don't know, 18 to 25-year-olds to do wildlife stuff. And we had to book a slightly bigger room. We thought we set up a Eventbrite. Eventbrite. Other services for booking events are available. And we said, well, maybe we expect just basically to make sure we weren't sat there on our own, and that somebody would come. Basically 160 people joined the Eventbrite to come for this casual chat about setting up a kind of young professional age type group for wildlife. And so we saw that this is a demographic that really is not being served, despite Bristol being a really kind of well-served for this kind of sector. And so that is now a 2,000 strong group that operates across the city and region. They do a huge amount of stuff. So this is a group that are looking at doing winter tree identification with some from the Woodland Trust. So they've tapped into a lot of the networks and things that we've pulled together through things like Communicate and through the BioBlitz program. And so this is really a deepening of engagement and lots of skills development and training that has all come out of that initial coming together around the competition challenge of BioBlitz. And in the subtitle of this thing, I mentioned City Nature Challenge, and some of you may have come across this already. And last year was the first international City Nature Challenge. And so this was something that started in 2016 in California, as most crazy ideas do. And that was essentially with using some new technology. San Francisco and Los Angeles decided that they were going to go head-to-head BioBlitz, see who can find the most wildlife. And they were able to do this on a city-wide scale, not just picking one park and seeing how much you could find there, but putting together a city-wide go. And then in 2017, having had the very successful head-to-head, they then said, right, well, let's invite the rest of the United States to do this. And they had 16 cities take part. And then last summer was the first international City Nature Challenge, with 69 cities over 5 continents taking part. We combined with Bristol and Bath to be one of those cities, and we had London and Plymouth also representing the UK in that. And to give you a little bit more of that kind of wider international context and maybe a little bit about what City Nature Challenge is and where it is, we're going to, because I kind of have a tendency to drift into a very Bristol focus, we thought we'd see how far away from Bristol can we possibly get. So we've invited a Cornishman to come and talk about a Cornishman who currently lives in Hong Kong. And so this is Shaun, who's going to talk about Hong Kong's experience in City Nature Challenge last year as well. And don't forget, if you haven't done it, do that. That should be your slides now. That's not your slide, that's my slide. There's your slide. Great.
All right, thanks very much. All right. Pleasure to be here, yes, or from all the way over from Hong Kong. So just to give you a little bit of information about who I am and the foundation that I represent. We work a lot to sort of do biodiversity engagement projects in Hong Kong to try and sort of engage and empower ordinary people, school students to actually get involved in nature that's on their own doorstep. We have our links, of course, to the Bristol Natural History Consortium. As Matt said, they had their guide to BioBlitz, and with their gracious support, we actually adapted it and to our own sort of situations. So we actually created a guide to running a BioBlitz for Hong Kong schools in order for them to actually go out and to organise stuff themselves and not having to sort of like always have to go to organisations like WWF to have their own activities. We also did it in Cantonese as well, so if anyone can read that, help yourself, no problem. So I should just go straight into it. How did we get on? Yeah, we shocked the world, okay, because throughout these 68 cities, plus us, of course, in Hong Kong, in total, there were just over 400,000 observations on our naturalists throughout the world. For us, we got over 20,000 observations. By the way, the City Nature Challenge was over 4 days, by the way. It was literally 4 days of going around, taking pictures of specimens, and then there was a 4-day grace period of identification where you could go back to your data set to see if you can further identify all these observations through a taxonomic sort of process. Species, we came 4th in the world, 2,932, and 7th for most observers. We, as I say, we surprised everybody because Hong Kong is not known for its biodiversity. Has anyone here actually been to Hong Kong? You raise your hand? Sweet. You enjoy it? Yeah, nice. Okay, so when you think of Hong Kong, people tend to think of something like this, right? Dense urban jungle, spiraling, skyscrapers, just really, really busy. And actually, for the most part, it is. We have a population of just over 7 million people, with a density of, just over 6,500 people per square kilometre. That sounds pretty frightening as well. Our land area is just over 1,000 kilometres squared. So, of course, the idea was, how did we get all of these people engaged with everything? And of course, why did we surprise everyone? Actually, if you just keep an eye on that photo, that's actually here. So these pink and purple areas, by the way, that's sort of like China, that's the border right up there. These pink and purple areas represent urban areas, these commercial areas, residential areas, industrial areas. There's a hell of a lot of green space in Hong Kong. And actually, where we are actually situated, we have a diverse amount of habitats. We actually have a sort of drier continental climate coming in from the north. We have the South China Sea from underneath us, which brings this more humid climate from the south. Over here we have lots of sort of craggy inlets, which actually a lot of them are shallow, so we have a lot of mangroves, coral reefs. On this side of the area we have a giant river system, the Pearl River, which brings in this sort of estuarine water, a lot of discharge from China coming across there. So we have lots of different sort of areas, so dolphins on this side, coral on this side, turtles down here, civet cats and all sorts of different things. So we actually have the biodiversity. So when you think of it that way, it's no wonder we came forth. But the people, of course, are very much concentrated in these particular areas. So how do we actually get these people to go out and actually see what they could find? With difficulty. You can see from this picture, actually, this gives you an idea of the insular nature of the residents of Hong Kong. They all like to live close together. It's very rare that they should actually go out into the countryside themselves. They've been told it's dirty and dangerous to go out into these areas. Do not go. These country parks are no-go areas. So therefore, Hong Kong has actually become a bit of a nanny state in that regard. We wanted to get rid of that. So, how did we do it? So, we had sort of three main strategies with this. One which we call captive participation. I know that sounds a bit... But what we sort of said to a lot of our partners who are working in schools and universities is you're actually going to be teaching about ecology. This was in April, by the way, so if any of you are teachers here in biology curriculum, ecology technically is always the last one to sort of be taught, and right at the end of the school year. April is roughly the school year, end of the school year before they go on and do exams. We said to the teachers that we knew, this is a great way of actually teaching ecology, taking your students out into urban parks, into lots of areas, and all they've got to do, whip your phone out, take a picture. That's it. And that is literally what we said to all of our NGOs and research institutes who did some sort of, these kind of activities anyways, nature walks, really managed stuff. And so I said to them, because it was literally just me that was organising this, so naturally I've got everybody else to do my work for me. I said to them, do what you do your nature walks, do your activities, but can you please just get your participants to download iNaturalist and take a picture? And they were like, is that it? It's like, yeah, that's it. Get them to download it and take a picture. And they were like, all right, I had to demonstrate it a few times, but then they got completely sold over. We'll talk about that a little bit later. So eventually I got 30 partners who kind of, different research institutes, schools and stuff, in order to sort of help us spread the word. And of course, public participation I Facebooked the hell out of this. Social media was an absolute godsend. Everybody in Hong Kong uses it. I put out bilingual information, little how-to guides, you know, like how to take the right picture. Don't go chasing after like butterflies or something like that. Just relax, wait for it to settle, click, done. And then upload. Brilliant. From that, we get this. So, from this, as Matt said, you had to sort of put like a boundary around your particular area. This was ours, and this gives you an indication of, you know, where people actually went. By the way, I think the different colours represent different kingdoms, so like plant kingdom, things like that, or even like birds and so on and so forth. I've never really understood it, to be honest, but it just I was more interested in the amount that was actually on here. So when our partners actually saw this, now this we're talking about a bit about the legacy, they looked at this and were like, that's very, very interesting. Tell us more about this technology. Because there's this phrase in Cantonese, it's called ma fan, and it literally means troublesome, bothersome. Literally, if it's too complicated, I can't be asked to get involved with it. Okay? I don't know if it resonates with any of you here, but ultimately, taking a picture and sharing it zaps it into, if it's within this area, it zaps it into some sort of like database which you can easily access. It's insane. So a lot of our partners, WWF for example, are actually regularly using iNaturalist within their own activities. University of Hong Kong regularly use iNaturalist with their own university BioBlitzes, and of course within the country parks behind it. So it's really revolutionised the way that we actually teach and spread message, and of course get more public engagement going. From our perspective, we looked at the data itself and was like, where did a lot of this come from? And of course it came from our partners. So we thought, perhaps we can do a school competition. Everyone loves a good competition. So we're actually doing it in the next couple of weeks. That's why this conference couldn't have come at a worse time for me. I've got a lot of work to do. But in terms of going out to different schools, both local and international, I said, we've got an opportunity here to actually collect, be a part and contribute to urban biodiversity. All of the ecologists in Hong Kong tend to go out to the country parks, the mangroves, the wonderful, beautiful areas. What's that other place? Borneo, all these areas. But they don't tend to sort of look in the city, in which there is a lot of stuff going on. From an education perspective, STEM, do you get that here? STEM education? God, it's a new buzzword, isn't it? STEM this, STEM that, or STEAM or STREAM or whatever it is. But in schools in Hong Kong, we're also looking at these opportunities to incorporate technology into learning. This ticks all of the boxes. Another great thing is that the way I marketed this to schools is that a lot of schools actually have an energy policy. Turn off your lights, turn off the computers, all that type of stuff. Resource management stuff, composting, that type of area. No one really has a biodiversity policy. And the way we looked at this is that we said to them, you could use this technology throughout the school year. Create a biodiversity monitoring station, an urban biodiversity monitoring station that your school can curate and keep going. Also, in your own lessons, you can use the data to talk about statistics. Look at trends, get your students to actually further investigate the data, analyse the data. The journey is actually much more important than the destination in this regard. The data, or the validity of the data, doesn't have to be the end point. And of course, it really helps when you have government backing. Our Hong Kong government recently released this policy, the Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plan, BSAP. I'm sure you've all heard of something similar for Europe. And a big part of this is promoting community involvement. That's what we're doing, okay? And actually our government has actually put forward funding mechanisms that will actually allow organisations like ourselves to get funding for awareness and engagement projects. So probably a striking area is this. So I have currently 26 secondary schools that are involved in this competition. And you can see here, as we said, you have to sort of like look around the, get a boundary around your school. These are the sort of different boundaries of the school in and around it. And you can kind of see, if I get more, perhaps from next year, if I get more schools involved, and maybe even community centres, groups, churches, mosques, all that type of stuff, get more of these little boundaries around, the data itself would be a little bit more plentiful and would actually be a little bit more interesting to look at. That is me.
Thanks, Shaun. And you might notice that Shaun isn't actually in the programme, but he is in the delegate list because we decided to do this double act at quite last minute. I'm sure that people will want to hound you afterwards, maybe after your slightly crazy next couple of weeks. This was the spread of cities in 2018. Can you see that? That's like very green on green. I've stolen that off the Californians website. So it's quite a widespread. But again, that's looking at, so you can see there's some distinctive holes in the map, Africa and Australasia down there. So those holes are being slightly filled in next year. So the Australians and Kiwis have been doing BioBlitz stuff for a long time. One of the challenges is finding a time of year that works for everyone. And so I think some of the challenges last year were around kind of planning of times of year and things like that. And then I think it's the kinds of organisations that would take on and lead this sort of thing, I think, and being able to access those organisations well is where things have been slightly slower in Africa. But we do have our first African cities joining in 2019. We saw already some of the kind of big numbers of data that are coming in, and these kind of chunks of data, it seems very impressive on its own, and it is kind of many expert naturalists' worth of numbers of records coming in within sort of 4 days. But I think almost the more important thing is the knock-on of that this is, there might be people who are the first time that they're recording and they may well go on to lead very prolific recording lives, or they may only do it once and never do it again. One of the useful things about the technology that we're going to have a quick look at is that we can tell whether or not they are. It wouldn't be fair for me to let Shaun talk about how brilliantly Hong Kong did without singing a little song for Bristol and Bath. So we dropped off the bottom of your top 10 graph there after some vicious fighting that happened between us and some of the some weird places I've never heard of in America. Where's the Triangle? That's not a city.
No.
So yeah, that was kind of some really contentious stuff going on while it was live. But we managed to finish ourselves as 13th in the world. When you consider, so when we talk about Hong Kong, sort of how many million? 7.3 million people. The population of our two cities is about 550,000. Is that right? No? Hang on, Bristol people. It's slightly more than that, if you include the kind of countryside things. But so we decided that we wouldn't just do Bristol, we would do Bristol and Bath, just give ourselves a slightly better fighting chance, and also Bristol and Bath, and if you know this is the 7 going up here, is it Bristol and Bath, and a bit more just around the edge. So there is some sensibility in the drawing of that map, which is that is the area covered by our local record centre for the west of England, and this little hat on the top there is just because we couldn't leave Slimbridge out. There was only one record made at Slimbridge of a mallard. They're getting very heavily involved next year. And where is Pete in here? No, good. Right. Yeah, the fact that I'm being recorded is not particularly helpful for that. But you can see, so we got nearly 10,000 records in terms of observations. We got over 1,000 species found just in this area. Again, was quite surprising, and we shocked people as well, as did Hong Kong, how well we did. We actually did so we were the top in terms of pure observations in Europe, And one of what we actually kind of calculated afterwards is because we were, I think, the 4th smallest area that was taking part, is that observations per kilometre squared, we beat everyone. So we won, everyone. So there we go, in the world, yeah. So of the 69 cities taking part. And we did it through a kind of mixed methodology. We did a little bit of schools activity. We were doing, again, we kind of produced a bit of a pack to send out to schools, but that was very self-directed. We kind of decided that we were going to try hunt as many things as we possibly could, see what worked, and then next year concentrate on the things that worked. And one of the things that really pushed it was looking at that kind of depth of engagement with some of our existing audiences who are already interested in wildlife, but perhaps aren't thinking of this as a way that they can take part and help. It's not the first thing that you think of as an activist, is that I'm going to go out and take a picture of something and tell someone about what's in that picture. We then had the kind of social media campaign. We threw 50 quid at Twitter every so often. We had a couple of city centre base camps where people could come, and we had the display of the big map and things like that, as well as some sort of community group activities. So we did lots and bits and pieces. And I think one of the things that really worked really well and that was really interesting was that we had a little bit of a generational divide in how people engaged with this. In our Bristol Nature Network type people in the kind of 18 to 30s range were all over this. They were getting loads and loads of recording. They were kind of in between, there was a lot of students involved. We had our team, there was actually some of the guys who were out doing some of that things in the front row, so they can probably answer some questions later. I'll get them to wave their hands in a bit. And so going out and taking pictures and looking at things, that worked really, really well. So one of the things, but then with our really established naturalists, our kind of older generation, the 90% of our kind of local naturalist society is over retirement age. And they were less fussed about the technology. In fact, many of them hated the technology. But said we were perfectly fine off like Excel spreadsheets or pen and paper. And so what we did was we had an event just after, in the kind of grace period, where we took all of those paper records and collected in everyone's notebooks and Excel spreadsheets and everything. And we got together in the office, again, pizza, beer, and data. And so we pulled it all together in the end so that it all got entered into the same database. And so, next year we are in the same strand as that we've been kind of looking at this kind of community of practice around BioBlitz. We're now looking at kind of extending that to include a bit of a UK community of practice around CCNH Challenge, and of course working with all of our international colleagues as well. And so this is a list of like potential cities that are going to be taking part in 2019 in April as well. And so we will be back, London will be back. Liverpool, Newcastle and Glasgow have all signed up and said, yes, we are definitely doing this. Leicester, it's part of the City Council who are putting themselves forwards and are so going through the grinding mill of permissions. And then Belfast and Cardiff are both kind of on the... Belfast have said yes, but it's verbal so far. I haven't seen anything on the dotted line yet. And I'm working on Cardiff. Those of you from WWF Cymru have already been chasing you around the conference to find out. Sorry. So Plymouth are a maybe, because the Marine Biological Association, who were leading it before, are looking at different ways of delivering it, and whether it's them or one of their partners.
Can I just ask, does it have to be councils that sign up?
Not at all. So not at all. So it's basically a leading organisation. Almost all of these are run by partnerships. It's difficult to do this without the help of lots of different groups, because it's kind of not a kind of defined project with funding and things like that. It's kind of coalitions of the willing coming together. So we've put ourselves on the line as the convener for Bristol and Bath, but we're going to be working with all of our consortium partners and all of the local organisations as well. London, it's the Natural History Museum. In Liverpool, it's the local record centre. In Newcastle, it's the museum there as well, the Great North Museum. Glasgow is the RSPB. Belfast is the Science Centre. So it's sort of anyone. Potentially, but no one. But I don't know anyone in Birmingham. So if you know someone in Birmingham who might be interested, so technically, if you go on the Californian website of all of this, they said, oh, it's all closed, and the cities for 2019 are chosen and things like that. I know slightly different, so come and see me.
Did you contact these people
Yeah.
to get involved?
Only in an open invite. So basically, this was through our community of people. There's about 300 to 400. I haven't looked at the mailing list for a little while. There's about 300 to 400 people who are on our kind of BioBlitz community, who have run BioBlitzes before, who kind of are the kind of people who like to do this kind of activity. So we put out an open invite to them and said who wants to represent their city and pull things together. So there's kind of options to get involved. You can kind of support your nearest city. We're going to be trying to kind of have those conversations over the coming few weeks. If any of you happen to be coming to the NBN conference, I'm going to be doing something like this there as well in November up in Nottingham. So see you there if you are. Or if you are feel like you are representing an organisation who could take the role of leading in a city and you want to get your city involved, you feel like you're missing out, then do let me know and I'll kind of make sure that the Californians let you on the list. So what we're going to do now, very quickly, is this is slightly technologically advanced, and I'm going to go through it a little bit quickly. If it doesn't work, we will skip it and go straight to. But you will have all, hopefully, downloaded the iNaturalist app. Some shaking head, but yeah, mostly nods. And so what we're going to do is we've got about just under 20 minutes left of the actual session, and then we've got a little break before the next session. And so I'm not going to ask you to come back in and reconvene afterwards. But so iNaturalist is a platform that we've been using for this. The main reason that we first started using iNaturalist was compatibility. The rest of the world is using it. So we kind of to fit in. There's a lot of homegrown versions of these kind of apps that can collect biological data. Those of you who might have used iRecord or iSpot for some of these different things. Seeing Janice in the room as well. And one of the things around the kind of iNaturalist thing was that we basically thought we were going to give it a try. It's something that's not widely used in the UK already. And we can see the reflection in terms of how many people are actually taking up using this app. One of the questions then is, where does the data go after that? We bear in mind my earlier graph of where the data goes into that system. And essentially, where I think one of the slides that I accidentally skipped over before, I'm going to see if I can just go back and find it again. There it is the iNaturalist essentially sits there. So what we've been doing in the here, because we have a slightly more involved verification system for biological data in the UK. We've been doing it for about 200 years in this country, so lots of different organisations have kind of grown up around this, whereas in a lot of the rest of the world, they've kind of gone, biological recording, we should do that. Here's a simple way with one organisation doing it throughout the whole country. So it's kind of, we've got this evolved system which is quite convoluted. And so what we've essentially done with iNaturalist as an international platform is to say, well, iNaturalist is the gathering platform where we have the user interface of the app, which is very intuitive if you're of the kind of smartphone generation. It's very kind of social media-like. And it then we've arranged with iRecord, who are kind of homegrown, more kind of developed by naturalists for naturalists. So it's slightly less on the kind of entry-level user-friendly side of things, but it's a bit more powerful and links all of the data into this UK system that then goes through to the aggregators. So, and that then means that the data gets sent through their collection of volunteer verifiers who check through the data over time and make sure that everything that gets through is valid. So essentially, we've worked with iRecord and iNaturalist to place it there so that it feeds across into those places. The final bits and pieces of how that works technologically are still coming together, but the process is kind of in place as well. So that's where the data kind of goes. So I'm going to try and very quickly do, this is, some of you might have noticed that every session I'm involved with, I try to give Jeremy, our technician, a heart attack to make sure he does something really hard. So I now have to unplug one of these things and plug in another thing. Well, that one comes out of there.